Welcome to this explainer. You know, people often walk past a packed liquor store and immediately think, wow, those guys are just printing money. But today, we're going to look past the surface of everyday industries and totally shatter that easy money myth surrounding the Indian alcohol business. Because, as we'll see, operating in one of India's most highly regulated sectors isn't a walk in the park. It is an incredibly complex game of compliance, taxation, and honestly, brilliant consumer psychology. Get this. Out of a 100 rupee alcohol purchase, a staggering 78% goes straight into government taxes. Right off the bat, this frames the industry not as a standard consumer business, but essentially as a heavily taxed government partnership. You aren't just selling a beverage, you're basically functioning as a primary revenue collector for the state. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to quickly cover the myth of easy money, the government's golden goose, navigating the regulatory moat, retail innovation, marketing an invisible product, and finally scaling through red tape. Let's get right into it.
Kicking things off with sections 1 and 2, the myth of easy money and the government's golden goose.
Let's actually break down the brutal unit economics of this business. Take a premium bottle of whiskey priced at 4,200 rupees. The actual liquid and manufacturing cost of that bottle, it's just around 200 to 500 rupees. The retailer might only scrape by with a 9% margin. The rest of it simply vanishes into taxes and distribution fees. It totally shatters the illusion of fat margins for these operators. You are working incredibly hard for a very, very thin slice of the pie. And to understand why, you have to look at how alcohol is taxed in India. Because alcohol is a state subject under the Constitution, it deliberately stays completely outside the central GST system. This means states have the absolute power to charge a basic excise duty, additional special duties, and a retail VAT. When you stack all of those up, you can hit an effective tax rate of around 70% in places like Delhi. To put that into perspective, this makes alcohol the ultimate golden goose for state governments. I mean, it generates a colossal 48,000 crore rupees in annual revenue for just the state of Karnataka alone. States rely heavily on this cash to fund social welfare programs and infrastructure, which raises a really fascinating analytical question, doesn't it? Do these sky-high taxes primarily exist to discourage heavy drinking? Or are they simply an indispensable fiscal tool that the state literally can't afford to lose?
Moving right along to section 3, navigating the regulatory moat.
Because every single state writes its own excise policy, just look at how wildly a single bottle's price fluctuates. A bottle of Black Label that goes for 3,300 rupees in Goa will set you back 6,500 rupees in Karnataka. Because of this, expanding a liquor brand nationally is an absolute nightmare. You aren't operating in one unified Indian market, you are navigating 28 completely independent markets, each with its own pricing, labels, and complex compliance laws.
Now, compare this to the FMCG sector for a second. Selling soap, or a can of cola, gives you access to a staggering 10 million outlets nationwide under a unified GST. But alcohol, it's heavily restricted to roughly 90,000 to 100,000 outlets, governed by super restrictive routes to market. In many states, the government completely controls the warehousing and the distribution.
And the retail barrier to entry is just as intense. To even open a retail operation, say something like Living Liquids in Maharashtra, you have to endure a grueling compliance process. Since no new licenses have been issued there since the 1970s, you literally have to buy existing licenses for up to 8 or 9 crore rupees. Then, you've got to map out hyper-specific 220-meter distance rules from your competitors and manage over 25 different licenses just to import and sell brands annually. It is a massive capital and regulatory wall.
Which brings us to Section 4, Retail Innovation and Premiumization.
So despite all this red tape, smart entrepreneurs figured out that upgrading the retail experience was the key to unlocking consumer psychology. For decades, buying liquor in India meant standing outside a grilled counter, a taboo, tap-on-the-shoulder kind of transaction. But by investing in premium, air-conditioned walk-in boutiques, some up to 5,000 square feet, these operators fundamentally changed the cultural stigma. By offering well-lit spaces and trained sommeliers, they made liquor shopping accessible and inviting, heavily increasing participation from women shoppers as well.
But knowing what these consumers actually want to buy once they walk in is critical. And the data is crystal clear. India is overwhelmingly a whiskey market, making up roughly 75% of all spirit consumption. If you want to build a major brand in India, you absolutely have to play where the volume is. And here is a brilliant piece of consumer psychology from Moksh Sawhney, the founder of Living Liquids. He realized that a mass-market consumer buying a premium whiskey at 1,500 rupees wanted a status upgrade, but maybe couldn't quite afford those 2,400 rupee scotches.
So, by pricing a new premium scotch at just 1,700 rupees, they targeted that exact psychological sweet spot, making the upgrade an easy, affordable luxury.
Okay, let's jump into Section 5, Marketing an Invisible Product.
So how exactly do you build a massive alcohol brand when direct advertising is strictly banned across the entire country? Well, entrepreneurs utilize what we call the dark market playbook. Since you can't run a TV commercial, you rely heavily on visibility. Getting your product into prominent international duty-free spots at airports is vital because it builds a global prestige story. You advertise in in-flight magazines, and most importantly, you partner with celebrities to leverage their massive PR and word-of-mouth networks.
But here's the thing. You don't just pick any famous face. You have to segment your marketing precisely. You match the rugged, mass market appeal of someone like Sanjay Dutt to a Scotch whiskey. But for ready-to-drink or RTD beverages, which are targeting a younger, weekend-driven crowd, you align with the youthful energy of an actor like Varun Dhawan. The celebrity essentially becomes the visible face of your invisible product.
All right, finally, let's zoom back out for Section 6, Scaling Through Red Tape.
If you want to expand, you are hitting some brutal roadblocks. First, you have 4 completely dry states: Gujarat, Bihar, Mizoram, and Nagaland, where commercial liquor is entirely banned. But more dangerously, the high taxation across the rest of the country has birthed a massive 60,000 crore rupee illicit gray market. Legitimate players aren't just competing with each other. They're competing against counterfeiters and bootleggers that thrive precisely because of that high-tax environment.
And this brings us to the ultimate irony of the Indian alcohol business. Established giants like Diageo and Pernod Ricard dominate over 65% of the spirits market, and the top brewers hold about 80%. Why? Because the crushing bureaucracy, the millions needed for licenses, the state-by-state distribution nightmare, it actually acts as their greatest competitive moat. It is incredibly difficult for a new startup to afford the legal and logistical warfare required to actually challenge them.
So as we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought about highly regulated industries everywhere. We always assume strict rules are there to protect the public, right? But when taxes hit 78%, retail licenses cost 9 crores, and a 60,000 crore black market thrives in the shadows, we really have to ask, who actually benefits from all this red tape? Does it keep us safe, or does it simply build an impenetrable fortress for the biggest players and the state itself? Definitely something to chew on the next time you look at the price tag on a bottle. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.